Hey there, my friends, and happy days to you, whatever day of the week it might be. At this point, I've kind of lost track. It's been an interesting year, and let me just start by saying I wanted to say 2020 has really sucked, but part of me wants to say that this is a necessary kind of renewal of humanity, what we're going through as a whole. It got me thinking about growing up in the 80s and how simple things were, you know. Um, and I'm going to get into that. First off, I wanted to start off by saying, this will date the video. Often, usually, the subjects I talk about in my videos very rarely are, dateable. They're just subjects about humanity and life in general, or at least dateable within a specific context of a week or a day. But what happened yesterday in Beirut was absolutely horrific. And I'm sure all of you have heard about that explosion in Lebanon yesterday morning. And you know, I've watched the video over and over of that explosion, and it is just intense. I think, well, most people probably realize how big it really was by looking at the video, but, it blew a 200-foot crater into the harbor there. And when you, when your port explodes, you lose a lot more than just shipping containers and items of trade. In a country like Lebanon, they've been struggling with civil war and COVID issues on top of, a complete economic collapse. And I know most Americans just kind of shake their head and say, oh, well, it's some other country. It's not my problem. I'm an American. They should have dealt with their own problems. Or people who, if you're not aware, it likely was not an attack or intentional. They had really horrible oversight on many of their confiscated items and whatnot. They had about in 2013, they had or I should say confiscated a ship that docked in their area. I don't know the full details of it, but they claimed that the ship was carrying agricultural commodities, and ammonium nitrate is one of those. It's used as a fertilizer, but it's also used in bombs. ANFO is ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. It's basically when you mix ammonium nitrate and diesel. That's what happened in Oklahoma. Well, they had, I think, less than 2,000 pounds was used in Oklahoma. They had 2,700 tons. We're talking 2,000 times more ammonium nitrate stored there than the Oklahoma bombing. A huge amount, and a fireworks building next door ignited, and probably boom. Regardless of what happened, it's just a travesty. And looking at the modern day and what's going on out there, it's easy to want to fall back into simpler times because there are so many things happening at once. And I think it's made us numb. I really do. I was watching this video this morning from the 80s. It said 7-Eleven at 2:30 in the morning in 1989 or 87 or something. It was hilarious. It was just people coming and going from 7-Eleven. One dude who's licking his teeth. You could tell he's done way too much blow. And it brought me back to, what it was like to be a kid in the 80s. You know, um, and then I started thinking about nostalgia, the how we grab onto the past in order to deal with what's going on in the present. And this develops into kind of a conservative like attitude through our lives. Not conservative politically, but conservative mentally, where we like things to remain pretty consistent. Um, it's like I don't know. When I was in the 80s, I was a skateboarder, and I loved skating, and it was one of my things. And when I was watching old skate videos the other day, this is was what kind of brought the whole 80s thing to mind. Thought, back then it was cool. I remember I had my Alva board, and then they developed boards with two noses, or a nose and a tail. It was like this big breakthrough. But a lot of us still skated old boards. It was more just about skating down the street, sidewalk surfing. And for those who don't know, street skating wasn't a big thing in the 60s and 70s when skating was young. They tried skate parks and ramps, and then there was too much insurance, and so kids realized, oh my God, you can skate anything. You can skate banks at the, grocery store, which is what we did at Safeway. Then we'd get kicked out. Somebody come out, you can't skateboard here. And then we'd leave for an hour and come back again. It was just this constant repeating thing. But it wasn't just skating. There was so much more freedom back then. I thought about in the 80s, everybody had a band. We had a rock band called Dementia that we made when I was like 15, and we played one show where we played like Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana over and over because we were opening up for my friend's band. But then I was thinking about the parties we went to, how much mellower it was dealing with cops, how much mellower it was dealing with neighbors and friends and people in general. How, every kid went in shoplifting in the local Safeways or, the grocery stores, and how today everything is just so filmed. I guess what hit me was everybody was happy to be on film at 2 in the morning at a 7-Eleven back when nobody had video cameras. It was like, oh, hey, I'm going to be on a video, hey. And they were all, would talk to the person and give their story. Today, you wouldn't see that. And I'm not going to say, oh, be the grumpy old guy, right? The good old days, back before cell phones and everybody was staring at their phone. It's not like that. It's more like the cell phones are a complete distraction from our personal interactions with one another, but also a distraction from the chaos that we all have to see in our daily lives through the media, through the lens of, social media, through television, through whatever we choose to, I guess, immerse ourselves in, And I think that in today's world, we expect too much, too fast, and we can't slow down. We're moving towards this thing called progress, which to me really never made any sense. This idea that exponential growth is what a country needs or what a household needs, that you're always supposed to be climbing a ladder or moving forward as if, you got to win the rat race. And each country wants to win its rat race, a rat pack race, I guess, against the other, and be proud of who you are and be proud of what country you come from instead of just being proud of what you've accomplished or what you've done in your own life. And so, like I said, every generation says, oh, the good old days. But today, I believe it's really true, and I'm going to tell you why. We have a much shorter attention span because of our phones and media and the way that we've been treated over the years. Long form conversation is almost dead. Unfortunately, there are a few places where it still exists. One of those would be, say, the Joe Rogan show. Regardless of what you think about Joe Rogan himself, the fact that there are people who can sit and talk for 3 hours without a script and be open about their thoughts is something that we should all be grateful for. And there's just not enough of that because there's not enough people. Or at least that's what we're told. There's not enough people who are interested in that. Really, it's just the kid culture, the super young culture that has the worst attention span issues. But it's moving into the older generations, my generation, Gen X, because we were all immersed in the same thing. We're all victims of this technical culture, which we wanted so badly. And now it's just helping us ignore. But also, it's helping us to get together, to make change, to sign petitions, to organize protests, whatever it might be. So there's a positive and a negative to everything. But when it comes to technology, that's a very difficult one to address. And we live in this instant gratification culture. It's a me culture. It's a victim culture. But it's also an abuser culture. I thought about this earlier. I thought so many people are playing the victim. You've slighted me, or you've said this, or you've said that to me, or you've done this, or you're a racist, or you're a hater. But also, there's an abuser culture within that creates that reaction. To give you another example, the protests that are going on right now. A lot of people say, well, it's not just about George Floyd anymore. Of course, I completely agree. It never really was. That was a trigger to an avalanche of people's emotions. And everybody has their own way of dealing with it. Some people write blogs. Some people march in the streets. Some people are just using it as an opportunity to throw firebombs and, what you would call accelerationists. People who want to see everything fall apart. And it's hard to not want to jump on that bandwagon sometimes. It's not about seeing things fall apart. It's about realizing that you have to raise the barn, raise, R-A-Z-E, before you raise the barn. You have to get rid of the old foundation before you can start over with a new one. And that means that we're all kind of stuck in this time where we ask ourselves, can we improve the world that we live in? Can we improve our nation through voting, through action, through petition, through grievances? Or is that dead completely to where nobody respects a protest? Everybody wants you to shut up and just do what you're told. It's a do what you're told society, and people have had it. And I'm not talking about just the US. This is happening around the world. There are protests in Israel, protests in Russia, protests in China, protests in pretty much every country right now. And it's not just about COVID or lockdowns or racism. And I think once we get that through our thick skulls and see that it's a bigger problem, then we can move forward. The issue is that if you try to make it more than what it's claiming to be, then you're considered to not be really appreciating, say, Black Lives Matter, the whole movement. I didn't even want to bring that into this, but it was because I was at the protests, because I saw someone I know arrested, and the cops claimed and called him a piece of shit and claimed he'd thrown a bottle at them when I know he hadn't. And it became this personal thing. And when I argued on Twitter against this guy, Andy Ngo, or NGO, whatever, however you pronounce his name, he hates the whole Antifa left. And I totally understand that. He got beaten up by them. However, he's protesting, he's posting pictures of people claiming they're Antifa members. And so I retorted. The point was, I had this discussion, which at first it was getting attacked. But after explaining myself, instead of being a complete douchebag and just calling people names and using ad hominem attacks, I actually had somebody who, respected it and could have a discussion about it. That's becoming rare. And I don't think it's always because the people are going crazy. And this is the point I want to make here. It's not that the left and the right have gone haywire. It's not that the liberals are crazy or the conservatives are nuts. It's that most people are still in the middle, and the loudest voices on the outside extremes are the ones that everybody hears. Most people, when you sit down with them and talk about things, you realize that you have more in common than you have in difference. That most of us, as Americans, as citizens, as world members, want the same thing. A simple life. To enjoy what we have. Not everybody wants to become a millionaire. Not everybody wants to, have more land than they need. Some of us just would be happy with a couple acres and a mule. That old, for me personally, I guess maybe I'm an exception. I mean, I want very little out of this world, and I want to give what I can. But I also feel like it's an empty promise to offer anything to anyone. And what I mean by that is, when I said earlier that every generation thinks that they're the last one, or that it's gotten so much worse, and that, the good old days were so much better, it's always something new that comes out that makes people freak out. When the automobile came out, people thought folks were going to die. When the first train went rolling down the tracks, people thought that people were going to die if they went faster than 40 miles an hour because nobody had done it before. When the first television set came out, people freaked. When the first radio came out, everybody thought that everybody was just going to sit in front of the radio their whole lives. It was no different with comic books, with movies, with, people. Every generation looks at the new thing that's coming out and thinks it's the biggest danger. And when the internet came along, we had mixed feelings. We said, this is going to cause people to be, this or that, but nobody could really predict that we'd all just sit there and stare at social media. Facebook was unknowable at that time. We had no realization or inkling of how bad we wanted to connect with one another. And now here we are. We've done it, and we've realized that we've overconnected. When I dumped Facebook, I was so much happier. I mean, I had it for a couple of years, then I ditched it for a year, then I had it for a year, then I ditched it for a year. Finally, the last time I ditched it, I said, I just have to walk away. Not because of Facebook as the problem, but because of myself. I mean, the first time I quit, it was because of my own self. I wanted to scroll, I wanted to look at other stuff, and it was distracting. And I'd get into arguments with people through text. But then I realized now it's just about media. The whole feed is just full of bullshit and ads and scams, and it's just not worth the time. The whole internet has become that. It's just one big sales pitch. And meanwhile, the whole media corporation conglomerates are just going crazy because they don't know how to advertise anymore. Buying billboards is not as effective as it used to be. You know, buying a newspaper ad is not going to do shit for you. Using clickbait doesn't even work because people become immune to that. And so we're living in a world where we want everything for free. We want our internet for free. We don't want ads. We want VPNs. We want privacy, but we want to be able to anonymously just rant about everything we want and not have any real repercussions other than what somebody else types back, which we can mute or block or ignore. Something I reserve for only the most horrific of people. In other words, it's okay to block and mute people. If you have people who are harassing you in your life, do it. I would have done it before the internet existed. I mean, I had friends in my life who I didn't want to hear anymore, so boom, I muted them by not answering the phone or not talking to them anymore. I mean, it's the same thing. But anyhow, to kind of finalize this, there's a lot to talk about, but nostalgia for the 80s for me is a simpler time when there were simpler ideas, ridiculous clothes, ridiculous hair. I had the mullet. I had everything. I mean, kids partying at the train tunnel, the bridge, you'd get busted by the cops, and, you'd have to run from the cops or go through without getting shot, hopefully. Back then, I'd like to just say one thing on the idea of cops and crime. I'm not saying the 80s was better. There was more crime up until 1992 than ever before. And America's worst crime was in the late 80s to early 90s. However, most of us in the Gen X dance around with your MC Hammer pants on generation didn't see it as much. And I'll be honest, as I brought up Andy Ingo, or whatever his name is, as well as Antifa. I live in Portland, or the Portland area. I grew up here. I've moved all around the Portland area. It is indeed the whitest city, I believe, in America. 70%. And on top of that, it's also the biggest protest zone 70 days running. And a lot of chaos, which has brought a lot of people to be frustrated. They don't want their town destroyed, burned down by these thugs, yada yada. The reason I brought that up was to say that for those who think that this is the end times or that these protests are something new, the history of protesting in this country, of riots in this country, Molotov cocktails and everything else goes back, to the beginning of the country. And there were riots in the 1800s, especially and into the 1900s. And this is when the Pinkerton Security Organization was formed. You might still know of them as Pinkerton Security. They were basically a group of thugs that was hired to gun down the civil disturbance, which was actually the union workers demanding equal pay, fair hours, and justice. They were painted to be the enemy. They were gunned down, dozens shot, I believe, by the Pinkertons. And basically this, rising of the people was quelled, even though they had legitimate gripes, which is, I believe, what's going on right now. I think that a lot of people, instead of pointing the fingers at which building is burning or which thug is doing what, from both sides, we need to come together and say, look, we do need police reform. We do need to change many of these things. No, we don't need to eliminate police completely because that's ridiculous. There are plenty of people who would take advantage of a system with no oversight from police, just like the police use that to take advantage with no oversight over them. We just need more transparency, not just from police, from our government, and from each other. A fucking honesty, pardon the language, but an honesty with one another, where we really start giving a shit again, or at least making an effort to give a shit again. Because pretending we don't care, having this dismissive attitude, posting your tweet and just moving on without defending your point or giving examples or proof, is what led us to this time where we are in an age of lies, where lies hold more weight than truth. And that's not new, but it's something I thought we would grow out of with the internet. I heard someone say it the other day. They said, I thought when the internet came around, people would be able to look things up and find the truth about it, and then we would get a lot of these things cleared up. But in fact, it's caused these bubbles of people who want to believe they know what's true, even when it's totally meaningless and it is casting out an entire group of society. The left and the right battle is bullshit. A civil war over wearing a mask? Are you kidding me? What world are we living in? It's hard not to lose faith, but we need a renewal. So I'd like to just finish by saying I have a lot of gratitude for those boring years that I spent in the 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s. There's an old Zen saying or Buddhist saying, which is, I believe it was some Zen master that said, "May you live in interesting times." If you know anything about Zen, you know that the surface meaning of something is never what it really means. "May you live in interesting times" was actually a curse. It wasn't a positive thinking or something you would say to friends or, to future generations. It was a curse. It meant, it was well known back then, if you live in interesting times, it means shit's going down. If shit's going down, it means that life is chaotic. And most people, all they want in their few decades here on Earth is the ability to grow with themselves, with their family, whomever, and to create something awesome in this world without being ridiculed for just being who they are, and then be able to pass on into the ether. And it's really that simple. So, living in interesting times back in the day, when we had new inventions every few decades, that was one thing. Being in an interesting time when there's a new invention every year that's changing our lives, that's something crazy too. Now we're in a time where every single day some new crazy thing happens. We're totally aware of it. Everybody's feeds, beep, and we're just waiting for that day when something really big goes down. And I'd like to say that this COVID thing is a small potatoes issue. Just like the threat of nuclear war, just like the threat of immigration, it's going to destroy our country. All these little things that people are worried about, these are things that have the potential over either a long or short term to harm an economy or a people. But you have to look at the other side of the coin. As long as people aren't being taken care of, immigration, for example, as long as we're not taking care of the others that we have in this world, then we're going to continue to suffer. So living in interesting times today means we have to think a little differently. So I'm out of time, thank goodness, because I'd probably go on for another half hour. Thanks for listening, and let me know your thoughts, as always. Thanks to my patrons, thanks to my subscribers, and I realize Patreon doesn't work and ads don't work, so I'm going to set up some sort of a merchandise thing. And I'm not going to say merch. Damn it, I said merch. I'll talk to you all more later. Have a wonderful day. Talk to you soon.